welcome everyone. Hey, so nice to see some of your cameras switching on. It's really nice to be here with all of you. If this is the first time we've met, my name is Pamela and I organize events for Opus. And today I'm really excited. We have a new presenter here on the virtual demo platform. That said, she's really well known and really well loved in the arts community. So we have Shary Bartlett joining us, and she's going to be giving a demonstration introducing us to encaustics. Now, we haven't had too many encaustic demonstrations here. So many of you may already be practicing encaustic artists, or this may be your first time learning about it. So welcome everyone. Although before we get started and before I pass the floor over, I'm going to take a couple minutes. I want to make sure everyone's super comfortable here on Zoom and so that we have a clear presentation. So I'm going to mention a few functions here, and they're going to be located at the bottom of your computer screen. Or if you're logging in on your cell phone, you may just need to give it a little tap so the functions show up at the bottom. So the first function I'm going to mention is the video function. Again, love the friendly faces out there. It's so nice to see you. If your video is off, it means we see your profile name or your profile picture. And I mention this because I have it set for 25 cameras that can turn on, and I do this for bandwidth purposes. If I notice bandwidth's getting a little bit crowded, I may turn off your videos, but I always love to start this way because it gives us that sense of community. So most important function here is the chat function. Now, I like everyone to look around for it. It looks like a little bubble with a spout, or if you're on your phone, it may be at the bottom, or you may need to search for three little dots for a pop-up menu to find the chat, depending on your device. Okay, so maybe give it a click once you find it, and I invite you to type in where you're logging in from. Super fun way for us to get to know one a little bit. I'm personally located in Victoria, so that's Vancouver Island. It's the unceded territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples. And Shary's joining us. You're joining us from Vancouver today, Shary?
Yes.
Nice. And I can see many of you are finding the chat, and we've got folks. Oh, we've got people from Penticton, New Year. Oh, that's Happy New Year's. Happy New Year's to you all as well. Tawasin, Chilliwack, Pender Island, Vancouver, North Delta, uh, locals from Victoria, some people across Canada and Toronto, uh, the interior of Vernon, Courtney, Up Island here, Saanich, Nakusp, BC. Oh, I love Nakusp. You guys got good hot springs. So if you are logging in here and you're from Canada or the USA, Opus does ship to all of you. If you are logging in outside of North America, then we don't yet ship to you, but we're so happy you're here with us. Okay, so one more thing I'm going to mention before we get the ball rolling, and that's about the follow-up email I'm going to send to all of you so you can kind of sit back and relax, enjoy yourselves. I'm going to send a list of the materials used today. I'm also going to send Shary's social media links in there so you can see what she's up to in her creative life. And there will be a discount to go shopping at Opus. So do keep a lookout for that. And if you guys are ready, I know I am. So I'm going to pass the floor over. And Shary, I'll let you take it from here.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I'm honored. Sounds like people have come from very far away, so I'm really excited about sharing my passion for encaustic with you today. Can you hear me okay, Pamela?
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Great. I have been I'm an artist and an instructor, and I have been working with encaustic for about 20 years or so. I first was introduced in a mixed media class, and one of the teachers had one night where she had us painting with beeswax, and I had been working in mixed media for many years at that point, and I just thought, oh, this is my medium. And I'm somebody that gets bored a little easily with art materials, and I have never become bored with encaustic. It just has so many, there's so many ways to apply it in different, with different media. And I will share a little bit with you today about how I've experimented with encaustic and why I love it so much. And hopefully I will convert you all to trying it. Um, I do teach internationally, and I also teach online, and I teach in my art studio in Vancouver, Canada. And I'm going to welcome questions from you throughout the chat. Pamela's going to gather them on the chat, and then I'll stop at various points and ask if you have some questions. So welcome. I wanted to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to be addressing during the presentation. We have an hour and a half together, so I'm going to leave lots of time for questions at the end, but I am going to go through a few points to share with you. First of all, what is encaustic, which is a common question I get. A little bit about the history, very brief history of encaustic. I'm going to talk about the materials and the tools that I'm going to use and the various supplies. And as you know, these supplies are available through Opus Art Supplies. I'm going to talk about how to apply the wax or the paint. I'll be calling it paint as well, because when we put pigments in it, we call it encaustic paint. So I'm going to show you how to apply the encaustic paint, how to fuse the wax, and how to get a smooth surface, which is a bit challenging at first. Then I'm going to talk about color and how we add pigments to the waxes and how to add that color, how to layer the color, how to texture and get an amazing surface on your encaustic painting. How then to incise, how to carve into the wax and how to thin it, how to pull it back if you've got too much wax on there. That's one of the beautiful things about encaustic is this ability to be textured. I'm going to do a little quick demo of collage because encaustic also makes a wonderful kind of glue. So it has an ability to layer different materials into the wax. So you see in this amazing depth. And I will talk about studio safety and setup as well. And then briefly talk about the care of encaustic, how you can take care of it, what are the best ways to display it, etc. And then I'm going to do a little slide presentation of around, I think, 12 images. I'm showing you today very small work because we just have a little iPhone to work with, but I will show you in this final presentation of about 12 pictures of some larger work that I've done and even some sculptural and installation work. So just to give you a sense of the breadth of encaustic. And then have questions and a discussion. And if we have extra time, I have a few other tricks up my sleeve. So we'll see how much time there is. So first of all, what is encaustic? People often ask me if I have invented encaustic painting, which I have not. It is an ancient art, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But people are often not familiar with encaustic, so I wanted to show you what it is. So first of all, encaustic is a combination of beeswax. So this is beeswax that we have various kinds of beeswax. Generally, beeswax has a natural color to it because the bees are pollinating, and when they make the wax, there's pollen in the wax. So what encaustic is a combination of beeswax and resin. So this is not synthetic resin. So you've seen paintings with synthetic resin before. This is natural resin. So this is tree resin. And you can see here, it's kind of like sap from the tree. And then beeswax, which you're very familiar with. So beeswax and resin, damar resin, are combined together in a combination of generally about 9 parts beeswax to 1 part resin. And that is what we call encaustic medium. So you're familiar with acrylic medium or oil painting medium. Um, and this is just what we call encaustic medium. So as you can see, beeswax can be various colors with that pollen in it. So if you were to add red pigment to this, for example, you would find, if this were your medium, you'd find that you'd be getting kind of an orange color. So generally as artists, sometimes we use natural colored beeswax, but usually we use beeswax that has the pollen taken out of it. So we get what's called white beeswax here. And generally, when you buy it, you find it in this pellet form. Sometimes it's in a solid form like this, but generally it's in a pellet form. And this is great because the way that you melt it, it melts very quickly when it's in this pellet-like form rather than the solid form. But you can also make your own beeswax as well, which we can talk about later if we have time. But generally, most of us just buy it as what we call white beeswax, and then later on, pigments are added to that. Um, the reason that we add the resin is that it hardens the beeswax, so you'd know that beeswax is kind of soft, and it also, so we don't want it to be chipping and that sort of thing. And also it brings a beautiful shine to the wax. So it hardens it, it heightens the melting point a little bit. But then when it's cool, you can buff it up and it brings this beautiful depth and beautiful shine to it, almost like glass, but kind of milky. So it's a surface that we adore as encaustic painters. It smells beautiful, and it's a perfect medium for me to work with because I love working with natural subject matter, and the idea of using a natural material, this combination of beeswax and resin, is really appealing, so that my subject matter is nature and the materials that I'm using are natural as well. Um, so as I said, it can encaustic can be applied two-dimensionally. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make encaustic paintings on a two-dimensional surface, but it also can be applied three-dimensionally. It can be used sculpturally, and as I said, I'll show you some images of that, how I've used it with fabric, how I've used it on paper to make books, doing monoprints, etc. And it's very user friendly. So if you were to take a beginner's encaustic class, you would find it exciting because it's so easy to use. The thing about encaustic is that it's hard to manage. So it does its own thing. It has a mind of its own as well. So it takes a while to control and get the results that you want. And it always maintains its own idea. So I love this aspect of encaustic, that it's a combination of what the wax wants to do and what I want it to do. So it's really kept me challenged over these last 20 years. So a little bit about the history of encaustic. I'll just move this aside for a moment. And I forgot to ask you, Pamela, if I show you this picture, is this upside down for people?
That's the correct orientation.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so encaustic is a Greek word that means to burn in, and people often ask me if encaustic means is like it's caustic, but it's actually a Greek word meaning to burn in, because of course with wax it has to be melted. It has an ancient history that goes back to 500 BCE, and it's the longest lasting painting medium. So we know that because around 100 AD, the Romano-Egyptian people had the common thing to do was to have your portrait painted in using encaustic. So that would be the beeswax, the damar resin, and then natural earth pigments. So there were about 5 earth pigments that were used. And in their youth, in Egypt, people would have portraits made of them. So I have a couple of printouts here, portraits of people that would be done in their youth, in their prime. And so those portraits would hang in their homes during their lifetimes. And then when they passed, those portraits would be cut around the edge. So they were kind of oval at the top. And when the body was mummified, those portraits would be wrapped into the body of the mummy. And you can find these in museums around the world, and they're really very striking and beautiful. And very, you can see the talent of the artist. But knowing going back to that time, we know that they didn't have electricity, of course, so all of this was being done over the embers of a fire. So that's where the word encaustic comes in, to burn in. So you can imagine how labor intensive it was. So it was not a art form that artists warmed to, and it kind of fell out of favor. And in the 1950s, artists like Jasper Johns started to experiment with encaustic. And probably a lot of you are familiar with Tony Sherman, the famous Canadian portraiturist. I don't know what that word is. Um, who painted with encaustic, painted portraits of people with encaustic. So it became more popularized in the latter part of the 20th century, and then at the beginning of the 20th century, the 21st century, it became very popular. So it is now a medium that many people use, and everybody is experimenting in different ways with it. And it's a very adaptable, as I said, material to different approaches. So that is a little bit about the history of encaustic. And I'll just say a couple more words. As I mentioned, I'm going to be using these pellets of wax. These are made by Jacquard paints, the ones that I'm going to be using today. And also RNF paints and Encausticos make these, and Encama pigments as well. So I'm going to be using this clear encaustic medium. As I said, encaustic medium is also a carrier for pigments. So in this demonstration today, I'm going to be using a few different pigments. I have Cama pigments. These are made in Canada that I'll be using. And RNF paints makes encaustic medium as well, with beautiful pigments as well. And also I was going to mention Encausticos. I was honored when my custom sets came out with Encausticos, that Opus Art Supplies carried these. And these are especially custom chosen colors for encaustic paints. So I will be using these today. I'm also going to be using pigment sticks that are made by RNF Paints, and I'll be talking about them. These are pigments that are suspended in linseed oil and a little bit of wax, and they're particularly designed for encaustic. However, they've become very popular lately with the use of cold wax medium as well. What else did I want to tell you about? Chalk pastels. So you can also use chalk pastels very successfully with encaustic. I'm going to be using pan pastels, and these are pastels that are in almost like a makeup, almost like an eyeshadow container. You can buy them in sets from Opus, and I will show you how those are made as well. I'm going to be using a number of tools. You can see here that I've got a pancake griddle set up. Sometimes people use a griddle that's made of anodized aluminum, which I have here, but this is actually just a pancake griddle underneath. And I have a temperature gauge here to keep an eye on my temperature, which I'm going to turn down just a little bit. And I have various colored waxes here. So these are these waxes that have been melted down. So the Cama and the RNF paint waxes that are in painter's tins or little muffin tins, metal muffin tins. And I also have a number of brushes. These are natural bristle brushes, so they're not synthetic brushes because that would melt in the wax. And so I have a whole palette ready here for you. This is just clear encaustic medium that I have, and then some different brushes. I'm going to be using a heat gun to melt my wax, to fuse my wax rather. And I'm also going to show you a torch. A lot of encaustic painters use a torch. This is an actual fire torch. This is a torch head called Iwatani. You can also use larger torches that you can get from the hardware store. This is very easy because it just pops on and off, and I'll show you that in a moment. It is a preferred way often for artists to use and fuse encaustic medium. However, it depends. I'm working from home today because I can't use fire open flame in my studio, so I wanted to show you how to use the encaustic, the heat gun as well. And a lot of people actually love that as well. So I'll be using that and then a number of clay tools. So I've got a number of clay tools and also some, I've got a dental tool, and there's a lot of clay tools that can be used. This one, you'll see how can I show you that? How I use this for thinning the wax. So we'll be working through that as well. Also some blending medium by R&F Paints that is on your list as well. This is a clear medium. So this is basically these oil sticks, these pigment sticks, but there is no pigment in there. And I'll be showing you a few other tools that are possible to use for encaustic. You'll notice also that I've got a temperature gauge here so that I can keep, yeah, you can just see the edge of it here. I can keep an eye on the temperature of my wax, and I will be talking a little bit about safety at the end. So this is an important feature of working with encaustic. I'm also going to be using wood substrates. So encaustic can be painted on paper, although depending on the thickness of the wax that you apply, you can imagine if I had a piece of paper and I were putting lots and lots of layers of wax on here, that if I bent it, it could crack off. So we always use a hard absorbent surface. So this is a cradled panel. You can also just use plywood, but these are preferred because once they go up on the wall, they look beautiful and professional. You can, I often, what I do with a cradled panel is I cover it with tape and paper. You'll see as I work that this gets really messy. The wax drips over the side. So often what I do is cover the sides of my board with tape, with blue or green tape, painter's tape, so that it peels off easily. And I usually cover the back as well. This one's come a bit loose, but I cover the back because I find that the back gets really messy as well. This board has encaustic gesso on it. So that is linked on your list of supplies. This is a special kind of gesso. So this is not acrylic gesso. And this is probably a good time to say that encaustic and acrylic are not compatible. Oil and encaustic are, but acrylic is a polymer. It's like basically a plastic medium. So you can't really mix plastic with molten beeswax. So this is a special kind of gesso that is encaustic friendly and very absorbent. And so I also will be showing you a couple of other potential surfaces. This is called encaustic board. It's also linked for you. This is by Ampersand Art Supplies. And it is basically an MDF board. You know, that sawdust that's glued together, very hard board. And it has a surface on it, a pre-sprayed surface of RNF paints and gesso, encaustic gesso. So it's very absorbent. I don't know if you can see it well there, but very absorbent, very easy to use, and it heats very quickly, and it's very easy to get a smooth surface. So this is a lovely board to work with. And finally, you can just take a board and put paper on it. So that's another option. You can glue a piece of paper, or in this case, I've glued a map. So you can start basically with an underpainting and then add your wax on top. So those are a few, that's basically a list of supplies that I'm going to be working with. Um, so I'm going to jump into
Sure.
demonstrating, but thought I would stop and see if there are questions so far, Pamela.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we've got some really great material questions here in the chat.
Great.
So are there other types of wax that people can use versus beeswax?
Right. Good question. Yes, there are. People use microcrystalline wax, which is a very white wax. So, as I was saying, this is what we call white wax, but microcrystalline wax is really white. So, like if I take this piece of paper here, you can see the difference. So there's still a yellow tinge. So people commonly use microcrystalline wax, which has I'm pretty sure it has a slightly lower melting point, but the colors of your pigments will remain even more true using microcrystalline wax. People have used carnauba wax, which is a harder wax, and there are a number of different waxes that can be used. I haven't personally used much more than the beeswax. I've experimented a little with the others, but mostly I just use beeswax. And of course, you would add, to make it encaustic medium, you would need to add that Damar resin to it as well. So you would be making your own wax by taking a certain, 8 or 9 parts microcrystalline, for example, and adding the resin to it to make it encaustic medium.
And do you have a favorite Damar wax that you like to work with?
Well, I'm not sure. I have bought Damar wax from Opus in the past. I'm not sure if you sell it. In the past, it was sold in small jars. I'm pretty sure you don't sell it um, in big quantities. So I do have some. I don't know. I don't know, Pamela, whether you
Uh,
want me to
the Eco House Damar resin comes in the small jars, and we do have it in
You
stock for that.
do? Okay. Okay, great. So that would be your first bet, is to contact Opus and look at them. Yeah.
And
And there's lots of recipes on making encaustic medium on the internet. There is a specific way to do that, and if we have time, I can talk about it. But it's easy to find those recipes, and it takes a little while. That's why a lot of us like to use these pellets, because they're quick and easy. But it is possible to make it, and it's good to do it just at least once, because it really makes you appreciate the easy pellets, and also it gives you a good sense of attachment to your materials, which is always a good thing as an artist.
can pine resin be used?
I have heard of artists who use different resins. Personally, I have not, so I can't really confidently answer that. I have heard of people who source their own beeswax in their areas and use their own resin. I believe that Damar resin is a kind of a pine, a tree. I believe it's from India and from Indonesia, but I should know more about that. So I don't know. You could Google that, but I don't know the absolute answer, because I've always just used Damar resin. Sorry about that.
And how about mixing different brands of encaustic media? Is
Oh,
that okay?
oh yes, yes, absolutely.
And once you have a griddle being used with encaustics, is it just your encaustic griddle or can you clean it and keep using it?
Good question. That's an excellent question. No, you cannot ever make pancakes again on that pancake griddle, and they would taste terrible probably. No, and as a general rule, we always say that when you're using any materials, any kitchen materials, I mean, obviously forks and knives and all kinds of things we grab as artists from the kitchen, but it's a good idea to keep those dedicated to those materials or those tools dedicated to your artwork. With these pigments that I showed you, the pastels, and with these pigment sticks, these are very high quality paints. And they, if it says cadmium red, there is cadmium in that paint stick, in that oil stick. So you do not absolutely want to mix that with your food. Also, you want to be using gloves. So I will be talking about, as I said, safety later, but you want to be using gloves for those, using those materials.
And the melted encaustic colors that you have, is that the paint block melted down 100% or is there wax added
Great.
into it?
Good question again. And I will talk about that when I'm talking about the paints as I'm melting them. But yes, these are concentrated. These paints are concentrated colors. So often we add about 3 to 5 parts medium to the paints. So I know that those paints, when you look at them in the store, you think, wow, those are expensive. And that is because the quality of the pigment is very high quality and also because they're concentrated. So you just need to add a little bit of those that pigment and add maybe 3 to 5 parts medium, and you will still have a very strong color. And as you add more medium, you will come up with a glaze, which is kind of see-through, and I'll be demonstrating that after. Thanks for asking these questions. These are really helpful.
And with your board with the map glued onto it,
Yeah.
what kind of glue do you use?
Okay, good question. These are great. I use either acrylic gel medium to glue it down, or I'm a fan of Yes paste, YES paste, which Opus also sells. Some artists don't like Yes paste and feel that it comes up, but I actually like Yes paste because it's easier to reposition. I find, sometimes if you put a piece of paper down on a board, it sticks really quickly, especially with a gel medium. So I like the Yes paste for that. But when you're gluing the paper down, you have to be really careful, excuse me, to make sure that you get all the edges glued down and the corners particularly. So you'd want to put your glue onto the surface of the board and then lay your paper down and then really make sure that you get all the air bubbles out, maybe roll it with a brayer and then really check the corners. So many times I've started painting a painting and the corner is lifted up and then the wax gets underneath and that's really hard to get it to stick down. So that's the best trick for adding paper onto the surface. But of course, paper is very absorbent, so it's very encaustic friendly.
Okay, so I believe we've got to the end of the questions regarding the materials that you've mentioned. So,
Okay.
so in just to be aware of the time and what you have planned for us today, maybe we can begin with the presentation again.
Perfect. Okay, great. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to stand up, but I don't think that matters to you, does it, Pamela? You're not going to really see me anyways, right? Except for, is that okay, or do you want me to stay down?
No, no, you
Okay.
just move like you need to.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to put my gloves on here and I'm going to prime my board. So I have an encaustic board here. And The first thing you want to do when you're priming a board is heat it up. Because if you add hot wax to a cold board, your brush will just stick. You'll notice that I've got my brushes warmed up as well. This has gone a little bit, you can perhaps see here, this has gone a little bit more solid. So I'm just going to heat um, that tray up a little bit more. So I want to heat up my board. If I talk, can you hear me, Pamela?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm heating up the board, and you want to make sure that you get all the parts of the board warm. It doesn't have to be hot, hot, but this basically makes the board receptive to the wax. I could use my torch as well, but I'm just going to use this heat on here. So now I have this encaustic medium that's warmed. I have my brush warmed, and I'm going to carefully, rather than drip wax all the way over and bring it over to the board, I'm just gonna, wipe some of the wax off and bring it across my board. And then you can cross over a little bit with that wax, laying it on top of each other. And here I've got just trying to get the light there, you can see it there. I've got a layer, 3 little lines of wax here. You can see the brush marks a little bit. You can see where it's shiny there. That's because it's not quite cooled down. And basically, it's not a good idea to really move your painting around while it's still shiny like that, because that means it's not quite cooled. As soon as it hits the board, it cools down, and you can see how it's got that matte quality here. So now I'm going to turn my board. I painted it this way. Well, first of all, you're going to heat it up. So every time you put a layer of wax on, you need to heat it again to fuse it in. So that makes this first layer soak right down into the wax, into the board batter. So if you don't fuse each layer of wax, then what happens is that those layers of wax, as you lay them in, can chip off or separate. So every layer that I'm going to put on, I'm going to fuse. So essentially, I'm just priming my board here. I waited till it became a bit matte, and then I'm adding more wax. I'm going to fuse it. I'm going to turn it again. And the reason for that is that when you start with your brush, it ends up being a bit thicker on one side than it is on the other. So I'm just cooling it down a little bit, and I'm going to do another layer here. Now what I've done is I've heated it up. I did a base layer and fused that into the board. I added 2 more layers, moving the board around each time. And I'm just giving it a little wave so it doesn't pool. And then I fused it again. So essentially what I've done is made what I like to call a sort of a skating rink. It's kind of like a glazed donut surface here. So if I get it in the light, you can see that it's very smooth. So each of the layers has fused to the other. And this is basically a primed, almost like what we would buy a primed canvas. You can see here, I just put my finger on there, and it's a bit of a I sort of wrecked it there. So you have to be careful. It's best not to pick it up right away and just let it cool a little bit. But that's my primed board here. So now I can add color to that. Color, of course, is something a lot of us love. I'm just going to bring this wax over here. So I've got this molten beeswax here, and if it gets a bit thick, which it does sometimes, you can add some just some clear medium to it. I normally have little clothespins on here. I forgot to bring them today, but normally I would have like a clothespin on here and I could just pick up this can and move it over. I'm just trying to add a little bit more wax in there to thin it down. So you can see that when you add color, this has got some medium in it, as you can see. So it is somewhat translucent, and in other parts, when you add more color in there, it becomes very opaque. We'll try and add a couple more colors in here just so you can see when you add other colors in. Each time you put a layer of color on, you want to fuse that so that that layer of wax connects and attaches, melts, fuses into the other layer. So if you give it a light fuse, basically the paint that you put on stays in place. And I'll show you what happens when you fuse a little bit more. So again, if I were to add a lot of medium to that paint. So I've put some paint down here on my board, and I'm going to add a lot of medium on there just to show you what that looks like to make a glaze. So if I were to just put this color on straight, you can see that it's much more opaque. And if I were to add a lot of medium on there, you can see that it makes a glaze. So that is the way that you can have a darker area or a lighter area of the wax. And again, each time you put a layer of color on, you're going to give that a quick fuse. Now, I'm going to also do a demo here with the torch, just so you can see what that's like. So this is a butane gas. It's just a camping gas. And this Iwatani torch head here that just fits on. It's got a little notch on it, and you can fit it into this notch hole here. Push it down and turn it. And then when you turn on the gas, it lights up. So the beauty of this with the heat gun, what happens is that you have air blowing through, so that moves the wax around more easily. And also generally you just have a couple of settings of high and low. Whereas with this torch, you have a lot of ability. You can have a very strong flame or a very, very soft flame rather. And you can also play with the flame. So it's a little bit hard to see here, but it's a very soft flame here, and it becomes a more concentrated flame. So you have a lot of ability to control. So I will just fuse this. I'm going to show you what happens when you what we call overfuse. So sometimes, as I said, if you go lightly over your area, you will just fuse that layer of wax in place. And this is easier to control with the torch rather than with the heat gun. But if I fuse it, if I quote overfuse it, you can see how you can get all kinds of bleeding effects from the wax, which can be absolutely beautiful and also can be absolutely not beautiful. So that's the part that I was talking about where wax is very hard to control. But you can see how, depending on how much you fuse that, you get all kinds of different effects. And that's part of the magic and the challenge of wax. I'm just going to let this cool for a second. I'll bring that up uh, to the camera to see. The board is quite warm now underneath, so I don't want to move it yet. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples while we're waiting for that to cool. This shows you what you've got a layer of just encaustic medium here. You've got a very light layer of glaze, and then you can see here how the more layers you add and the more opaque the paint is, that you can't see that underneath, but you can see this beautiful sense of layering. That's one of the great things about encaustic. This is an example of layering of different colors. So you can see how the colors are visible underneath. So there's this sense of three-dimensionality that comes simply from a few layers of wax added. Few examples of, oh dear, that's not what I wanted to do, of wax that has been overfused, so to speak. So you can see how the colors have bled together here. More examples of that marbling effect from fusing. And then sometimes you get these little happy accidents where you could never plan how that affects that effect comes about, but sometimes you get these little beautiful effects here where it's kind of like clouds, for example. And part of when you get to know encaustic, you learn when to stop. So you start to see this effect coming and say, oh, that's so beautiful, I'm just going to stop right here. So I'll show you this one up close that we just made, and then a couple more effects, and then I'll take some questions. So you can also drip. You can, you've shown how I've shown you how you can use a brush, and these brushes generally I just dedicate to each color. It is possible to clean the brushes, but mostly we just use different brushes for each color. So you can drip the wax on there, which makes a really interesting effect. You can also carve into these surfaces. So I can carve down. Now you see I'm carving down to some of the layers underneath. A lot of this isn't overlapped, but if in these areas where there's color underneath, you can see how I'm removing some of the wax to show what's underneath there. You can also carve right down back into the base of the board. If you had areas you decided, for example, you didn't want those drips there, you can actually remove some of that with a clay tool. And I also love using dental tools to carve in and make really detailed lines. So sometimes it's best, you can see here there's a bit of a pilling effect that's happened. So it's best with some of these tools to wait until the wax has cooled a little bit. If you've scraped off an area that you don't like, you can just simply heat it up again and it will become smooth. And that's one of the great things about encaustic is if something happens and you don't like it, you can just heat that up again, and often beautiful things happen. So it's a great sense of discovery. So I'm going to stop there and invite questions, Pamela.
Okay. There are a few questions here about the heat gun you're using.
Yeah.
What temperature do you have it on? Is one question.
Okay. Generally, I have it on high because I'm very impatient, but you can use it on low. Well, I guess it's sort of a medium low area. Generally, if I'm doing something very particular, like if I wanted to only carefully melt, I only wanted to partially melt those drips, I would probably use it on a medium temperature. And I'm embarrassed to show you my heat gun because it's such a mess, but this would be the high temperature, and then medium is in the center.
It looks like the brand you have there is Wagner. And how is there a distance that that you work within when holding the
No, that's a good question too. Generally, if I want to be more gentle in terms of the effect that I'm going to have, I pull it further away. As I go closer, it's going to have a much bigger effect. So you may remember when I heat it up very close to it here, it basically just blows the wax away. So that is a personal choice based on the effect that you want to get. This is a Wagner. This comes from Home Depot, I think, but these are paint strippers. You could use a hair dryer, but it doesn't really work that well because it doesn't really get hot enough. But it doesn't matter. You don't need this particular brand. This is just the one I happen to have.
You know, that was going to be my next question, the hairdryer question.
Yeah.
And so I'm just quickly looking through the questions here.
Okay.
And where you're doing your mixing, it looks like it's just on a piece of paper, but do you have it on top of something to keep everything safe?
Yes, I have. This is not on a piece of paper. This is a cookie sheet that I'm working on to heat. Um, oh, there's paper underneath, but normally I would be at my studio. I have metal tables that I work on, and marble and tile and that sort of thing. So, and also you can use a silicone pastry sheet. Those are all non-flammable surfaces. I
Excellent.
have paper here in the background to make it look beautiful for all of you.
And how about the temperature for for the griddle?
Okay, so the griddle again, I will talk about at the end with safety, but basically the griddle is about 200 degrees Fahrenheit or just under 100 degrees centigrade, so that I can keep track of that with my temperature gauge. Some people also have temperature gauges that shoot the temperature at the surface, and that can measure the temperature as well.
And how about the temperature for the wax?
Same thing. So you would heat the wax on that griddle that's around 200 degrees centigrade, or
Excellent.
just under 100 Fahrenheit.
Um, and there's been a lot of questions about gesso, and I know that R&F makes a encaustic gesso. And this is very like key because it does not contain any polymer. And you mentioned that encaustics and acrylics not going well together. So I just wanted to say that aloud to everyone because I've seen quite a few questions about that.
Yes, that's correct. It does have a tiny bit of polymer as a binder, but not very much. Mostly it's got a lot of very absorbent materials in it to absorb the wax.
Would an embossing gun work in replacement for the heat gun?
Yes, yes, they
And
work
how
well.
and how about a butane torch?
Yes, a butane torch as well. Yeah.
And the white sheet on the griddle, again, that's just paper.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood that last question. I understood the paper underneath on the table. No, this is an anodized metal anodized aluminum plate. And these are great because you can see the color a little bit better. You know, here, for example, this looks very dark, but if you're mixing colors, this is really great for being able to see your colors and mix it almost like a palette. And then if you don't want the wax on there, you can just wipe it off and clean your palette.
Okay, thank you for that. And sorry, folks, for anyone out there who I said it was paper too.
Yes,
Anodized aluminum plate, it is.
yes, I apologize, I misunderstood.
I gave an incorrect answer out there. Um, and then how about we keep going and then we'll stop again for questions here.
Okay. I also wanted to show you how to, getting back to this anodized plate here, how you can mix colors right on the plate. So some artists actually will take the waxes. So I'll open this one up. This is a Cama pigment. So some artists will just use those blocks of paint directly on the griddle, and you can mix your colors almost like you would if you were painting an oil painter, for example. So I've got my hot brush. I can add, I'm going to just heat up my board first just to make it receptive to the wax. And I can add the wax on here. You can see this nice texture as well. Um, and then I can mix those colors right on the anodized plate. So you can also see this beautiful surface texture that is possible with encaustic. And again, if I wanted, I could scrape away using those tools. So what I'm going to do now that I've got these colors on here is fuse them lightly. I'll do this up close. And you want to just take a look and see if there's a brief shine. I don't know if I can get that in the light for you. As soon as you see that little shine, you stop fusing, and then you'll be able to hold those marks to look the same as you've placed them on there. If you overfuse or use extra, you're going to make that bleed, which may be what you want to do. So those are ways of using colored waxes right on the griddle. You can also, as I said, use oil sticks. So I introduced these to you earlier. These are pigment sticks made by R&F Paints with linseed oil and wax and pigment. This one is an Indian yellow that is available as part of a set with Opus Art Supplies, and that's linked on your lists of supplies there. So with these pigment sticks, some of them are opaque and some of them are transparent. I think the ones that I've listed are basically transparent oil sticks, but they are also a beautiful, easy way of coloring with your pigment, but it's not a hard wax, it's a soft oil stick. So again, you're going to fuse that oil stick in. And if you fuse that oil stick into the wax, it will sink down into the wax. And if you overfuse, if you fuse a lot, you'll find that the oil stick is much less solid because it's got oil paint in there, linseed oil in it. So it breaks apart. So it can make really beautiful effects. However, might be unintended effects. So it's a great thing just to have boards like this where you're practicing with your materials and you can see how they react. Also, I mentioned that I've got these pan pastels. These are chalk pastels as opposed to oil pastels. These are like an oil pastel, but very high quality. This is like a chalk pastel that you would have used maybe when you were a child, or perhaps you use pastels now. So these are, I've got a little a little makeup applicator, and Pan Pastel also sells tools called Soft, SOFFT, that are applicators for these pastels. So you can just lift off a little bit of that pastel color and add it into your wax. You can pull that pastel over areas where you've got that waxed. Of course, I could have done that with the oil stick as well. The thicker you put it on, the more opaque it becomes. You can see when you add it over top of this textured area that the pastel picks up on the top surfaces of that texture, which can be really effective. Also, Pan Pastel has these beautiful um, iridescent. Yeah, hopefully you can see that a little bit there. So here is that iridescent pastels. This is a gold one. So with every material that you're putting onto the wax, you're going to heat it up. So here I'll use the torch just to demonstrate that again. And I'm going to fuse this very lightly. So as I said, I've got a lot of control that I can do with this torch here. And I'm going to fuse, I'll bring it up so hopefully you can see it a little bit better. I'm going to fuse that pastel, just trying to get it in the light. Fuse that pastel into the wax, and it's much less, it's much more stable than the oil stick is because it's just dry pastel. I'm just going to turn that up a little bit more. So I'm going to add that shot of heat over there just to stabilize those pastels, and they essentially just sink down into the wax, and that's also a beautiful way of adding pigment. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. If you overfuse the pastel, it will also break up those little particles. So sometimes that can be beautiful and sometimes not. So I'm going to just quickly show you a couple of examples of how I've used pastels to color. These are examples with photographs. This is a photograph of a flower that I've used some oil stick here. Trying to get the light right, but you can see how I've colored it a little bit with the oil stick, which is beautiful. This is also a photograph. This is a color photograph. The other one was black and white. This is a color photograph that has oil stick used to color in the areas of the painting. This is a pan pastel. This has got pan pastel on it. You can see how the gold of the pan pastel broke up. So sometimes you get these happy accidents that are wonderful. This one, another photograph, it has pan pastel here on the right, and then oil stick on the left, and I've carved down into the oil stick. You can also carve into this wax surface and press oil stick down into those crevices, and it makes an interesting effect as well. And I forgot to show you this earlier when I was talking about texture, but this is what we call accretion, where you start to take a textured surface so you can carve into your texture and into your painting rather, and then add wax over top successively, and it will start to build up this incredible texture. So I'm going to stop there and take questions.
Okay, so just to clarify, you were using images printed off on paper and then layered over top with wax.
Correct.
Okay. Is there a certain type of paper you recommend these photos be printed onto?
Yes, I would recommend watercolor paper.
Okay.
Yeah, watercolor paper. And if you're printing your photographs, ideally you would want to use a printer that is an archival ink printer, not a general inkjet printer, but using archival ink. But a lot of us don't have archival ink printers, so just using an inkjet printer is fine. But you'd want to print it out on cardstock, so either a heavier piece of paper or watercolor paper. Also, there are professional papers that you can buy. Epson, for example, makes a lot of beautiful papers um, that are designed to accept the ink, and those are great papers as well.
And you showed us the RNF pigment stick and the pan pastels. Now you added the pigment on the top of the wax. Can these materials be used in between wax layers?
Yes, you can, as long as they're well fused. So I can go back into this painting that I've got here, and as long as I've fused those colors well into my wax, I can add wax on top of there. If I had just put pan pastel in here and not fused it, when I pull this fresh wax over here, all of that pan pastel would bleed onto my brush and I'd end up with purple on my brush. So that's not ideal. But if I'm building up the wax onto this surface here where I've got the layers of the pan pastel and the oil stick underneath, and I keep that up, I can bury that in. So that's a beautiful thing about the encaustic, is building up those layers. If I just lightly fuse that wax on there and basically sandwich um, that layer in there, it'll be sinking into the background. You'll notice that this wax is a little bit cloudy when it's first applied, and then it cools down and it becomes clear and we can buff it.
And with the oil paint, does the oil paint layer need to be completely dry before fusing?
No, it doesn't. You do have to use just a little bit of the oil stick. And just to clarify, oil paint can be used instead of an oil stick. But what you would want to do is take the oil paint and put a little bit on a piece of paper towel for a while, maybe overnight, and soak up as much of the oil paint as possible. These oil sticks have very little linseed oil in them. So you don't need to do that with these, but if you were using regular oil paint, that's what you would want to do.
And the last piece that you showed us with all of the texture, would
Mhm.
you mind explaining a little bit more about that piece?
Yes, yes. So if I had carved texture into here, if I started with a textured surface and start adding wax lightly over top of that with my brush, And I'm not going to fuse quite as frequently as I do with the regular surface. Normally you would fuse each time. It takes a long time to build up this much texture, but you can see already that there's starting to be some build up here. And so what you would do is every, say, 5 times or so, 5 layers, you're going to give it a quick shot of heat, take that away. And then once that's cooled a bit, I'll come in and add more layers, just lightly pulling my brush across. And eventually, over time, it ends up with a surface like that.
Excellent. And when working with the pan pastels, you add a layer of pan pastels, and then if someone wants to carve into that, can they, or do you need to fuse first and then carve?
No, you could carve before. The thing is, if I had put that pan pastel on, um, if I put that pan pastel on there and I carve in first, see that nice sharp line. I have to very carefully fuse it, which works okay. But if I fused it too much, it'll start to bleed. So you have a little less control. If, however, I've fused that already, that pan pastel in there, then when I use my tool to carve in, I can control it a bit better in terms of the line.
And is there a motion to use when fusing?
That's a good question too. I love all these questions. I like to fuse, well, I generally, when I'm fusing a baseboard, when I'm doing that priming, I would fuse across. And then I'll probably take a look at it and make sure that it's all equally fused. Some people like to fuse in circles, and often I do that as well. If I'm just working in a particular area, I'll just keep my gun just in that area. One of the things I often find with students is that they fuse on an angle, kind of, I think we're used to like drawing our hair or something on an angle. So it's good to keep that gun up and down so you don't get a hot spot. You can imagine if you're fusing on an angle, it gets hotter here and cooler on the side.
And can you fuse and still retain visual brush strokes?
Yes. Yeah, you just fuse lightly. So with that first demo that I did when I added the color, you can still see the brush strokes here. Let's see. You can, so most of it I've kind of wrecked, but you can still see those brush strokes there. So as long as you fuse lightly with your torch or with your heat gun, you can maintain the brush strokes. You just need to see a little bit of a gloss, and then it's fused in enough.
And with your printed photos, did you print it black and white, add color, and then add wax over top, or did you print a colored photo paper?
Some of them I printed on colored photo paper. I printed them in color on the photo paper. So this is actually a color print. And some of them were printed in black and white. So this is a black and white image. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I got my words a little mixed up there. Thanks, Cherry.
Okay, so here's another example, actually. This is a black and white photo without any coloring yet. And this is a color photo without any coloring. So I would come in, I could carve into that, I could add pan pastel, I could add more or less wax. So there's just a million possibilities. And the nice thing about using photographs is if you don't like the result, you can just do it again.
Excellent. And with your very textured piece, is the texture stable?
It is not super stable, to be honest. They're very fragile. They're very effective, but they are fragile. So I could flick that off. And so ideally, especially if you're selling work, you would only want this, for example, so far, I can add more wax in here too, and that will remain stable as long as it's fused properly. It's just that when it gets to be really high like this is stable for sure. I mean, I can't break that off, but if it were to um, bump into something, a piece of it might chip off.
Okay, I think this is a great time to pause with the questions that you continue with your presentation.
Okay, great. Um, I can see that I got very excited and I have more things that I wanted to show you, and I'm going to quickly just show you some examples of things, and rather than do the demo, because I want to leave enough time for questions and I can come back to that. So I'm going to show you a few mixed media examples of how you can use encaustic. Encaustic, as I said, is it's like kind of like a glue. So if I were, let me just, it's too many examples here. Um, I've got my board here, another board. I'm going to heat my board, and then I can start to attach materials. So this is a magnolia leaf that I can press into the board. I'm just going to go quickly through this demo here. But I can use this encaustic medium to essentially glue that material onto the wax. And then you can see the beautiful texture on it. And I'm going to heat that, and that is now fused into my board. And I can add other materials. This is a piece of metal here. These are some Chinese coins. So there's lots of options of things that you can add in using wax. This is an example of using cheesecloth. So I've done a photo transfer in here and added cheesecloth to get some texture, and added my colored waxes. And I've got a few pictures at the end that I'll try to show you if we have time. This is paper. This is rice paper. So these are just images printed on rice paper that are made into a book form. But you can paint wax on rice paper and it becomes very translucent. I'm not sure if you can tell how translucent that is, but it's really beautiful. These are alcohol inks that are on encaustic. So I've set up an encaustic surface and then used alcohol inks. And you can perhaps see this textural surface of these very carefully created dots, which I've used a stylus for. So this is a tool that I teach in my classes, but it is just put that down. It's a tool that picks up the wax inside this tip. And this tip is, you can see here, it's kind of a forked tip. So it pulls the wax up into the electric tip. And then I can use that to draw with. A couple more examples of fabric. So I love fiber arts, and I have experimented with encaustic using dipping this is spun bonded fibers, dipping the fibers into the wax and basically collaging them together into a sculptural piece. And I do have a number of large installations I've done with that. I've done a number of paintings, sculptural paintings on the insides of boxes using fabric to create these sculptural roses. This is plaster, a plaster surface. So you can achieve a lot of texture with beginning with a plaster surface. And another another of that same painting that I showed you earlier using the oil stick, but this is using that electric stylus to add a lot of detail in the floral areas here. So just many, many options of things that you can do with wax. And just wanted to say a couple of things, as I did mention at the beginning. I wanted to talk about the safety issues. Now, when you heat up beeswax and damar resin, there are fumes that are released that you don't want to breathe. So you need to have a source of fresh air coming in beside your work area, and then you need to have a fan on the other side of your area that's pulling that air out. So generally, I work beside a window and I have a fan that's pulling that air outside so that I'm sure that I have a source of fresh incoming air, and also the air that is around the fumes that are coming off this area are pulled out. As I said, I use a metal table or a silicone sheet or a metal surface to fuse on. I have a fire extinguisher nearby, and I use gloves. I keep my temperature just under 200 degrees Fahrenheit, just under 100 centigrade. Um, and I'm very careful, especially when I'm using my torch, to make sure that I don't have paper around and that sort of thing. So I try to keep my work area very clear of anything that might be flammable. And the one of the most dangerous possibilities is to get a burn. This area of the heat gun is extremely hot. So that's one of the reasons I wear gloves. But I have gotten a bad burn before by brushing up against the tip of the heat gun. So that's something to be really careful about. Encaustic is light fast, so it doesn't fade. However, with any art, fine art, you want to keep it out of the sun. It's not really great to have it over a fireplace, for example. People ask if it's going to melt, and I say that if your art is melting off your walls, then you're really in trouble in your home. So no, it doesn't melt. It's not great exposed to very, very hot conditions or very, very cool conditions. So it's not great to leave it in the back of a car if you live up in northern BC, for example. So try to keep it in normal living conditions. And occasionally you need to buff a wax painting. So it develops what's called a bloom. And I don't know, you can't really tell here. This has got a little bit, almost like chocolate, gets a little bit of a dusty powder on it. So every once in a while you want to buff your painting, maybe every 6 months or so. Over time, it oxidizes more. It oxidizes, so it doesn't get that bloom so often, but at the beginning it does. So you just want to buff up that painting. This is a photograph with encaustic paint on top. So if you buff it with a soft cloth, it's not going to scratch it. It ends up really bringing up the shine of the painting, and you can really see the layers, and it's so beautiful. And that's one of the things I really love about encaustic, is that depth and that shine. um, so I will have a few more minutes for questions. Just wanted to say that I know that Pamela is going to be giving you the links to my YouTube videos. I have a lot of free YouTube videos and videos on my website. I also teach classes in Vancouver, and I'm teaching at the International Encaustic Conference in Owen Sound in September, teaching a photography and also a class on three-dimensional sculptures using LED lighting and encaustic and fabric. So I'm really excited about that. I have a number of books that I'm published in that are on my website. And on my website, there's also a list of the classes that I'm teaching in January. And I'm happy to take some questions.
Wonderful. Well, let's talk about a few finishing questions. After your picture is done, do
Yep.
you use any type of sealer?
No, great question. No, we don't use sealer. Encaustic doesn't need to be sealed and it doesn't need to be placed behind glass. It's very, it's water, it's like not absorbent to moisture. So often people put paintings into bathrooms because it doesn't, it's not like watercolor painting that would absorb that moisture. So you can frame it just, you can, well, you do it not framed, for example, or you can frame it just and put it into a drop frame. I often use Opus's Whistler frames, which are made for canvas, but you can drop a standard size piece into there. But you don't need to seal it with anything, and you want to buff it every once in a while.
Lovely. And how about, now I know a lot of you want to know the answer to this question. How do you care for the brushes? How do you clean them?
Okay, I did mention that earlier that I just generally use a brush for that one color. You can clean them using soy wax, which I suspect Opus has. I'm sure Opus will have soy wax. And you can you can have a container like this, dip your brush in there, and basically just swish it around to try to get the paint off there. Then you can use paper towel and sop up, kind of lean on it and squish it and try to take some of the pigment out. Then you can put it back in and rinse it and back and forth. It's kind of a pain and it takes a while, and most of us don't bother. We just say, okay, this is going to be my green brush, this is going to be my orange brush or whatever. So
And how about magazine pictures? Can they be incorporated?
yes, yeah, I have used that magazine pictures. Make sure they're well glued in, but they're, unless it's like the cover of a magazine, that would be not so absorbent, but generally the pages themselves are absorbent enough.
And what's your number one tip for beginners?
Oh,
You can
I
give
guess my number one tip would be just have fun and experiment. And if you're not happy with something, say, okay, what happens if I overfuse this? Just to really try to be childlike about it. And it's pretty easy to be childlike with encaustic because it is just so exciting to use. But to try not to achieve anything specific as a beginner, to just be playful and also to write notes on the back of your work. So I often will scribble down what I've done because I can't often remember after, oh, what was that I did, or how did I achieve that cracking effect, or what was the material I used. That's a really helpful tip as well, because then you can go back and remember what it was you learned.
Okay, and well, folks, amazing. We're coming to the very end of the demo now, and I just have to say you all kept me on my toes here in the chat. So many great questions. I can see encaustic is a topic of interest here for all of you, and I promise I'll invite Shary back. So if we didn't dive deep enough into today's demo and you want to learn more from her, I promise I'll send her an invite sometime again in 2025. Shary, it's been an absolute delight to be here with you tonight, to see your art, to learn from you. There's so much love and gratitude flowing your way right now. We're just so grateful for you to take a time with us today. And everyone, again, for being here. It's such a great community. I'm so happy and thankful for each one of you.
Thank you very much. Well, we love Opus, and you've been around for so long helping us express our own creativity, and we're really grateful. And thank you for inviting me. And if there are any questions people come up with, feel free to contact me via my email or join my mailing list. And I have lots of tips and discounts and that sort of thing. So I'd love to hear from people, and I wish you well. And hopefully you might be able to join me in person in a class. That would be great.
And just a reminder, folks, Shary's social media links, a link to her courses, all of that's going to be in that follow-up email. So again, beautiful day to the rest of you, and we'll see you again.
Great. Thank you. Bye.